Yo, what is going on, everybody? It is your boy, OG Den, back again with another video, and today I'm bringing you Skateboarding for Dummies Episode 2. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about picking out your very first skateboard. So now that you know how to assemble and put together your board from episode 1, card right there, now we're going to actually pick out the board that you're going to want to purchase. And it may not be as simple as you think. There's a lot of factors that go into it, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put timestamps up somewhere on the screen, and we're going to start with regular skateboard decks, and then at the end of the video, we're going to go over different longboard decks. And we're going to go over the differences, the things you need to look for buying one, and then you should be able to make a pretty informed decision. So let's get started with normal skateboard decks. Okay, so the first thing you should know is that there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of skateboard deck brands out there. Like one there's a lot. And a lot of these companies are actually really good, and as a beginner, I wouldn't really focus on finding the best company because most of these companies are well established, they make great boards, and it's really the little specifications that you're going to want to look for. So I will link in the description of this video some popular companies that you should be totally fine with checking out and getting your first board with. And I wouldn't worry too much about it, just find one that has a cooler graphic for you, honestly. Like, they're all going to be pretty good boards for beginners. So this brings us to the first important part about selecting your board, and that is going to be the width of your deck. So most skate decks for trick boards and whatnot, they're going to be about the same length. They might vary slightly, but generally there's a pretty industry standard length for typical skateboard-esque boards. And the main difference between a lot of these boards is actually going to be the width of the board. So width generally varies between anywhere from 7.5 inches wide to 10 inches wide in some cases. I will put the metric conversions to those on the screen. And this is mainly because the width of the board gives a different feel. So generally when you have skinnier boards, they're going to be a lot easier to flip. So if you like doing a lot of kick flips and flippy tricks, for beginners it's generally easier. But if you have a higher width board, it can actually be a good thing for people with larger feet or people who want a little bit more of a stable feel to the board, because the really skinny boards can actually feel a little unstable for some beginners just because of how narrow they are. So you kind of want to find a sweet spot in between super wide and super skinny that will work for you. And for me, I find that about 8 inches wide is a pretty good sweet spot for most beginners. It's not super wide, it's not super skinny, it's just about in the middle, maybe a little bit more on the skinnier side. So I personally like it because it gives me enough room for my feet on the board. It's still fairly easy to flip and spin the board, so those two check off. And the overall experience is pretty good for an 8-inch board, in my opinion. If you don't know which width you want to get, I would suggest looking at an 8-inch. Keep in mind that I have men's size 9 shoe in US sizes on the smaller end, but I can definitely see people with larger feet, shoe sizes 10 and 11 in men's, definitely using an 8-inch board. And if you have really large feet, maybe look into an 8.25, possibly even an 8.5, but I generally say don't go higher than an 8.5 unless you have a really good and really specific reason as to why you would. So that's just my 2 cents on that. So that is the width of the board, pretty important, but as a beginner, I would suggest looking at 8 inches. To go along with the width of the board, you're also going to want to make sure that your trucks fit the width of your board. And if you go have a local skate shop, this should be pretty easy because you can pick out your board there and they will give you the right length of trucks that will go with that board. Generally speaking, when you get your skateboard width and then you put the trucks on it and the wheels should line up perfectly with the board. So the wheels aren't sticking out and the board's not sticking out. So it should be pretty lined up. And you just want to look online when you're buying trucks and make sure that you find the trucks that are going to fit that particular width. So, you know, if you're getting an 8-inch width board, just make sure that you type in like trucks for 8-inch width boards. So make sure your trucks match. The next few important things are going to be about the actual construction of the board, and you probably shouldn't have to worry about these things too much because of the fact that if you're buying from a well-established company, these are pretty good already, but it's going to be the concave and the pop of the board. So skateboards aren't actually flat. The surface of the board isn't flat. Obviously there's curved tails, but there's more than just that. Generally, if you look straight down the board, there's going to be a little bit of a bend on that, and that's called the concave of the board. Now that little bend gap area is meant to keep your feet more locked in, and it can help with some flip tricks, and it's generally a good thing to have a little bit of concave on your boards, because a completely flat board is not ideal for regular street trick skating. Freestyle boards, on the other hand, it might be different, so that could be for a different video if you guys want to see a video on freestyle skating. But for this video, concave's generally good, and for the brands that I'm going to link below, you shouldn't have any problems with that, but it is just something to keep in the back of your head if you're getting a brand that I don't have recommended. Make sure that it has some sort of concave, because flat boards generally aren't as good for street skating and normal skateboarding stuff. And then also the pop of the tail. So not every tail is made the same, unfortunately, and some boards have more pop to their tails than others. And what I mean by pop is, let's say for example the ollie, your general trick, you know, pop the tail and then the board pops up and then you land. So it's like a jump with the board. Well, when you hit the tail on the ground, that's what I mean as the pop. And some tails, when you try to do like an ollie and pop the board up, it doesn't go up as high as you would necessarily want, and that's just due to the construction of the board, the wood used, the heaviness, lightness of the board, all kinds of little factors that are hard for beginners to really pinpoint and really make a good decision on. Again, check out the brands below. They should be fine with the pop. They're all well established. I would just look around in the internet if you're going for a different brand and make sure that people are happy with the board, because some boards, like for example the Kryptonics that Walmart sells, are complete garbage and their pop is horrible. Keep that in mind, but don't worry about it too much. Another thing you'll want to keep in mind is the amount of tails on the board, so the actual deck shape. Cruiser boards, for example, usually have one little pop tail, and trick skateboards have two. I'm assuming that most of you guys are looking at trick skateboards, so you know, make sure it's got that classic skateboard-esque look to it, otherwise it might not be what you want. But if you are looking for a cruiser board, generally cruiser boards have one tail, and that will be the back of the board, and it's just kind of a staple of cruiser boards and something they use, and it can help differentiate the trick boards from the cruiser boards. So make sure you know what you're getting as far as that. Cruiser boards are obviously meant for cruising, and regular skateboards are meant for a variety of other things regarding tricks, transition skating, skate park stuff, street skating, stuff like that. So those are pretty much the main points for skateboards in general, and under the companies that I'm going to link in the description, I'm actually going to link a few boards that I actually think would be good for beginners, just so you guys can have some options along with that. Alright, cool. Now let's briefly talk about longboards. Alright guys, longboards. Now longboards are kind of my specialty. I ride them most often, more than regular trick boards, so we'll keep this brief, but we'll make it very informative for you guys. So there are generally three types of longboard types of decks. There's drop-through decks, there's drop-down decks, and there's top-mount decks. There can be a few variations of this, for example, drop-down and drop-through decks, but those are nuances. We'll get into the main three. First of all, drop-down, drop-through versus top-mount. I just came out with a video on that. Check it out right here. That will go into the details comparing those two. So I'm not going to cover those in the video, but I will cover drop-down really quickly. So drop-down is basically where you have a top-mount board, but as you get to the main part of the board actually slopes downwards so that it's lower to the ground. So this is going to help with your center of gravity while also giving you a speedier board. I haven't really used these boards a lot, but a lot of people like them, and I may actually be getting one soon, so we'll have to check it out. Those are your three types of boards, and now here's the things that you want to pay attention for when buying a longboard. Sort of the same with trick boards, but for different reasons. Number one, the tails. A lot of longboards don't have tails, and a lot of longboards do have tails. The main reason for getting a board with tails will be if you want to be learning more longboard freestyle tricks and whatnot, or if you just want a little more maneuverability. If you want a longboard for downhill riding or just for cruising around, not necessarily necessary, but it wouldn't necessarily hurt either. I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about tails unless you specifically want the board for freestyle and tricks. If it's for cruising or downhill, it could be a nice bonus, but if you find another board that doesn't have tails that you really like, I wouldn't worry about it too much. The next thing we're going to talk about is concave. Just like the skateboards, concave is even more important with longboards because you're typically going a lot faster and you need to be really stable and locked in on your board. And concave is going to do that for you. If you have a flat longboard, trust me, I have one. It's not good. It's just not. You need to have concave. It's going to really lock your feet into the board. You're going to feel a lot more in control, and it's going to feel more like an extension of your body rather than this piece of wood you're standing on and rolling around. Definitely make sure it's got some sort of concave. Here's two good examples of boards with concave that are good. Another very important thing with longboards is the flex of of the board. I personally really like longboards that flex even just a little bit versus stiff boards. Flexi boards means that it dampens a lot more vibrations than the other boards, and that can be really helpful for so many different things. If you're riding around on super bumpy roads, having a flexi board is going to make those bumps feel a lot less there through your feet versus a board that's going to be really stiff. You're going to feel every single little bump and crack you go over. So that's why I personally really like flexi decks. They're just so much more smooth and nicer to ride around. So definitely look into flexi decks. I don't even buy decks that aren't flexi for longboards because they're just not my thing. Generally with longboards, you don't have to pay attention too much to the width either because it's a fairly industry standard. It's going to be, you know, anywhere from 9 inches and higher, but generally for most people, that's going to be plenty enough space for your feet. So don't really worry about the width too much. It's not going to affect you as much as it would a skateboard. Just like skateboards, longboard trucks also need to match the width of the board. Generally though, like I said, since the width is an industry standard, 180mm longboard trucks are usually going to work on most decks, and especially if you have a drop down or drop through deck, because the tails actually narrow themselves in from the rest of the board, so you can really have a wide variety of sizes of trucks. But if you perhaps have a top mount board and the tails do not curve in and it's about the same size overall, make sure you have the right trucks for your board. Otherwise, don't worry too much about the trucks, because generally any trucks, as long as the wheels are sticking out over the tails, are going to be fine for those boards. That's pretty much all I got for the longboards. There are a lot of longboard brands as well, just like skateboard brands that you can pick from that are awesome, so I will leave those linked below as well. If you have any other questions, maybe I missed something, because sometimes I tend to do that, drop it in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this or more skating videos, cool stuff like that, vlogs, we got it all here. Hit the subscribe button, like the video, let me know your thoughts. Hope you all are having a good day. We're gonna have a banger video coming on Wednesday. It's gonna be awesome. Stay tuned for that. This is OG Den signing off to the OG gang. I'll see you guys in the next video. 500 subscribers, here we come. Once we hit 1,000, I'm cutting my hair because and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.